Howdy! Welcome to Moonlight Less Than Moonlight. I'm Justin, and today we'll be talking about Rushi Vyas's I Saw You and I Learned This, Beloved, which was published in the 2018 spring edition of Gasher. Rushi Vyas, in his own words, is a writer, educator, and current PhD student at the University of Otago. He earned a BS from the University of Michigan and an MFA from the University of Colorado Boulder. Rushi has served as a career advisor on the University of Michigan, a curriculum developer and co-founder at an education-based startup, assistant director of career services at NYU, and teacher of creative writing and psychology at the university level. He is passionate about the intersections between art and education. He has organized readings and worked as an editor for literary journals and presses. As usual, links to the poet's site, this week's poem, and any other sources are in the description below. Plus, the like and subscribe buttons if you feel so inclined. No content warnings this time, so I'll wait here until you're back from the poem. Good to see you again. Now that you're back, let's give the poem a closer look. We're going to come back to the title a little later in the poem. First, let's look at Sage Kapila, and possibly the oldest school of Indian philosophy, which he's credited with establishing, Samkhya. Because of how we know about him, a collection of Kapila's aphorisms, and his name speckled throughout Vedic texts like the Rig Veda and Yajurveda, we can't say much concrete about him. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan and Charles Moore state it plainly in their source book on Indian philosophy. Quote, "Tradition ascribes the authorship of the Samkhya system to Kapila, an almost legendary figure, said by some to be the son of Brahma, by others to be an incarnation of Vishnu, and by still others to be an incarnation of Agni. He probably lived during the 7th century BC. 19th century occultist Helena Blavatsky even suggested that these Kapilas were possibly real, but multiple people. Samkhya as a school of thought seems to have survived for us primarily through Isvara Krishna's Samkhya Karika, a 4th century CE collection of verses discussing the philosophy. I don't want to get too caught up in the details, since an episode of the History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps and a lecture from Swami Tattva Mayananda at the Vedanta Society do just that. The shorthand, drawn heavily from David D. Flood's An Introduction to Hinduism, is this. Samkhya is Sanskrit for enumeration, and, as would be expected, involves enumerating parts of experience. First is a distinction between an eternal and unchanging pure consciousness, or Purusha, and eternal and unchanging materiality. Prakriti moves from pure potentiality to manifested through the balance of its three elements, Isattva, a principle of light, Rajas, a principle of change, and Tamas, a principle of darkness. The enumerated experiences as charted out by Flood himself are on the screen right now. Definitely feel free to pause if you want to. Now, why all of this? Because in order to understand the first two lines, Sage Kapila defines destruction as causes return, we have to understand how Kapila would understand destruction and causation. If Samkhya posits Purusha and Prakriti as eternal and unchanging, how can anything be caused or destroyed? Simply through the Samkhya principle of Satkaryavada, or existent effect theory, which states that the cause of something is in its origin. By this thinking, a house is not caused by builders ultimately, but is in the wood itself, and so the builders are activating what was latent in the wood. In the same way, destruction isn't destruction as we perceive it, but is simply the fulfillment of a cause latent in the destroyed. These ideas would go on to influence a school of Indian philosophy that you definitely know the name of, yoga. One of the most common images of yoga in the West might be someone with their palms pressed together, slightly bowing, saying Namaste. And while this is also a traditional greeting in Southeast Asia, it traces back to the yogic gesture called Anjali Mudra.
We're symbolizing unity, a unity between you and I, a recognition of the light. So we say Namaste to say, I see the light in myself, and I see that light in you, and therefore I see that we are the same.
As the speaker bows to this definition, we already start to see a theme emerge. The speaker sees a unity, a oneness to the universe, up to and including that which comes to disappear from our sight. From this position, the speaker takes a customer's finished dish to my hands. Necessarily, this is finished only in an ironic sense, which is emphasized by the following all line in gauze, a phrase that begins the next line, pointing to the connected scene of Mom reads my palm, weaving them together like gauze. The act of taking dishes for a living is thereby unified with the image of the speaker's mother reading their palm, not coincidentally the part of the hand integral to forming the Anjali Mudra. I'm not going to go into depth on palm reading, but there's a link in the description to a palmistry site if you're curious. The symmetry of the speaker turning to the person who gave birth to him in order to be told he will live a heavy and long life, presumably after the mother's passing, in order to trace your origins, is richly symbolic of the cyclicality and interconnectedness suggested by the poem. Hence why immediately after origins, we return to the speaker holding crumbs, your smudged remains. The speaker has switched from the article the to describe the customer and his food to the second person pronoun, pointing us now towards the beloved of the title. And our proximity to them mirrors the speaker's. We have a smudge of them, leftovers like the naan chunk I sneak into my mouth before the plate ends in the bus tub. If a loved one transmuted into scraps of bread to be scarfed down instead of thrown out sounds morose, it should. Don't we all, the speaker asks, bathe in demise like my fetish? For reasons that will be apparent shortly, I think it's important to see fetish here not the same as kink. Rather, it might be read best as totemic object. This kind of fetish has imperialist roots, dating back to Christian European merchants using the concept of fetish to explain how West Africans had a, quote, irrational propensity to persify material, thereby revealing a false understanding of natural causality, in the words of William Peets in his essay, The Problem of the Fetish 2. Beyond that, it has a long history, but I recommend the essay if you're curious. Of course, we already see how the Samkhya idea of causality contests this natural causality, and how this poem, and poetry generally, uses this universal causality to tie all these parts together more freely. It also, I would say, points us towards the following moment within I Saw You and Learned This, Beloved. Smiling at your funeral as I namaskar, respect to you, Bapu, my cold nails, your neck climb to arrive at cause. First thing to note is that eating the naan and laying the plate into the bus tub foreshadowed this moment of memory, where the speaker's Bapu, or father, passed away and was lowered into the ground. Why is the speaker smiling at this, though? What's important to know is that namaskar is a dialectical variant of namaste, and so brings us back to the shared divinity and the concepts of Purusha and Prakriti. If there is an eternal and unchanging element in which all material things manifest, then death is not an end, but a reintegration. Bathe in demise like my fetish doesn't reflect an emo existentialism, but the idea that the speaker is fully within a world that is fetish-like, magical, and a, quote, false understanding of natural causality, end quote. What is at the top of the neck that the speaker's cold nails climbed to arrive at cause? The brain that processes experience, which floods graph from before placed under the mind, or manas. The experiencing body returns to its cause, prakriti. Destruction as causes return, as Sage Kapila said. What follows is the moment that confirms that this poem is ultimately an optimistic one, despite the seemingly morose tone before. The speaker jauntily sings a love song in their father's timbre while scrubbing chili grime off a plate. Here we return to the proximity of life to food, but as washing away, and an explicitly happy singing while washing the dishes mood. The song the speaker is singing is from the 1995 Bollywood film Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge. More exactly, this song represents the disunited lovers meeting again in India after having been separated in London. An interesting way to tie the two together is this relationship to parental figures, mothers who project lives, men who command lives, and the possibility of returning to old ways or old worlds. In fact, a translation of the lines you heard before were, "On seeing you, I've learned, sweetheart, that love is crazy, sweetheart." That is, I saw you and I learned this, beloved. In this sing-along mood, the speaker elbows plates that end up looking, quote, like jasmine petals in barren fields in a river in puja before shatter, end quote. The abstruse grammar makes it difficult to orient where the metaphorical jasmine petals are located. Just in barren fields, or in a river in barren fields, or in a river in puja in barren fields. But puja is the devotional act of worshipping a god or deified teacher through invocations, prayers, songs, and rituals. So, is the river metaphorically performing puja, and this river is in barren fields? Was the river shattered, and was the shattering the end of its puja? The confusion is exactly the point, as it reflects the chaotic material multiplicity of the world. You could even suggest that a shattered devotion of deified teachers is exactly what the speaker is performing by deferring to their father and capilla as they do. Leaning down to clean the plate shards, the speaker smiles for reason at flayed remainder. Instead of smiling for a reason, it's for reason itself. This reason is apparent in the flayed remainder that is the plate. Since flayed means exactly the peeling off of skin, though, we can easily tie the flayed remainder to the bodies of the dead. Together we can see the flayed remainder as causes return, as a destruction that reveals impermanence. In the plates, the speaker squints for any glints in the shards, which for me invokes the trope overdone on movie posters of someone staring into a broken mirror intending to show a shattered psyche. Here it's notably glints. The speaker is removed from the idea of finding a reflection of their self, but rather raw light. And even then, the speaker sweeps them away while laughing. So that's some thoughts on Rushi Vyas's I Saw You and I Learned This, Beloved, published in this 2018 spring edition of Gasher. Had a favorite line? Have your own interpretations or suggestions for future poems? I'd love to hear from you, whatever it is that's on your mind. And while you're down there, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and check out my sources if you're so inclined. Hope you have a great week, check out that movie, and until next time, thanks for stopping by.